Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The cost cap drama rumbles on, with Toto Wolff suggesting that Mercedes do indeed believe the extra 1.8-ish million that we think Red Bull spent over the cost cap for the 2021 season indeed did go to car updates as opposed to catering or whatever other discussions that have been had. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. Plenty of updates to bring you guys today. Firstly, from McLaren, confirmation that Alex Palou and Pato Award will drive for McLaren F1 respectively at the FP1 sessions in the US Grand Prix and Abu Dhabi. So I guess next weekend on the Friday, and then the 18th of November will be the turn of Pato Award. Pretty interesting stuff. There has been some talk that McLaren have tried to lure certain IndyCar guys over to their program because they can kind of promise them a drive in an F1 car. And look, McLaren are already building their next generation of talent in the Formula 1 seats. Norris, Piastri, that's their pairing for next season. But still, they've got a deep IndyCar program as well. There was even some talk right at the start of this season that Colton Herta was considerations for, well, it was in consideration to replace Daniel Ricciardo, and as it turned out, actually Herta was closer to joining Alfa Tauri. That failed to work out because the super license stuff fell through. But yeah, still interesting what McLaren are up to. This quickly from the Haas side, we don't know who their driver pairing is going to be next year to join Kevin Magnussen. We think maybe still it's going to be Mick Schumacher. They might go Nico Hülkenberg instead. But Pietro Fittipaldi, I think people consider him to kind of be the worst of the two between Pietro and Enzo. But yeah, he'll be kind of competing in the two rookie sessions for Haas in Mexico and Abu Dhabi respectively. So that's pretty interesting as well. And this quickly from Joe Soward and his green notebook lately, because lots of talk really about the possibility of the Alpine pairing next season. Gasly, Ocon, how are they going to get on? I don't really know too much about the history of this pairing because there certainly has been some drama between these two in the past, and not just these two but their families as well. Really from back in the karting days, there's been talks that, you know, their families were kind of competing to effectively get funding for their kind of driver respectively to compete in karting going forwards, and that caused a bit of a rift, let's just say, between the two families. Now apparently, I think this is kind of funny because seemingly Alpine has said to them, time will tell if this is wise, but I am told that in an effort to keep friction to a minimum, both drivers have been informed that they can have family at only 2 events a year and that the two families cannot attend the same races. So this is kind of one of those things that they say that, okay, yeah, it sounds like, oh yeah, this is going to calm down the tensions, but if anything, this implies that the tensions are maybe far greater than we might have presumed. The two families won't be allowed to go to the same race or it's all going to kick off. So, you know, classic French versus French drama here. But yeah, it's going to be exciting, right? I mean, if this is only the tip of the iceberg, like what is going to happen this season? It's going to be absolute fireworks between Gasly and Ocon, not just the drivers on track, but maybe the families behind the scenes as well. And the drivers have been informed, don't bring your family along to this one if, you know, if Gasly's family is going to be there, or things could go badly wrong. So yeah, just thought that was a funny insight into the world, the crazy world of French Formula 1. But let's dive into the cost cap saga then. This is going to rumble on for quite some time. Red Bull are still trying to make their case to the FIA as it stands that indeed they haven't breached the cost cap. They say that various points that they think actually fall outside of the cost cap with regard to a certain loophole. There's been discussions that Adrian Newey, one of effectively their chief car designer, really, from some perspectives, his contract is like a consultant's contract, and therefore there's certain kind of contracts that get excluded. So the two drivers' contracts are excluded from the cost cap, and then the top 3 earning employees, they are also excluded. But Adrian Newey is not an employee. They say he's a consultant, even though he's pretty much there every single race and looks like an employee. So and therefore that doesn't count. So that's one of the things where they're disputing with the FIA, probably other things as well. And look, maybe they make their point, the FIA agree, and they say, you know what, fair enough, Red Bull were correct, and they didn't breach it. But that seems unlikely because they've announced that they have, in a minor breach at the very least. And if they then roll back and say, actually, Red Bull had a point here, then the other teams are going to be like, well, I got a second, like, what do they say to you behind the scenes, effectively? So that's kind of the question here. And also, you know, comments have been coming out from Christian Horner from a few years ago now. For example, this one when he says, look, I'm convinced that all the main teams will go beyond the 140 million cap budget threshold. What is the penalty for a slight variation? Because an upgrade costing 4.5 mil can make a difference in the race for the World Championship. So, of course, just because he said this doesn't mean they did this, but there's been a couple of comments lately from Christian Horner suggesting that, you know, if the budget cap was to be introduced, as of course it was in the end, they would be willing to go over to fight for the championship. So maybe they have, maybe they haven't, but the FIA thinks they have because they stated that they've, they're in a minor breach, which is anything up to 5% or about $7 million. We believe it's more like 1.82 million. That's the rumor that's flying around at the moment. And Horner's been talking all this about the fact that they've got a fantastic technical crew, crew. That is certainly correct, but look, they've had to pay a fair bit of money for this technical crew because they got a lot of these guys over from Mercedes, paying them a lot more money to do so, and maybe that's where they've come into some concerns with the budget cap as it's gone forward. So we saw this yesterday from Toto Wolff apparently declaring behind the scenes that look, if Red Bull get away with a fine, they are willing to go above and beyond next year, Mercedes, to absolutely max out their car and do what it takes to win, even if it means breaching the cost cap and then paying whatever fine that might potentially entail. So probably implying to the FIA, treat this one seriously, or the cost cap is an absolute joke, basically, and that teams in future seasons are not going to give it much respect at all. Now, going forwards, there are still some upgrades to come. Red Bull, of course, understandably say, yeah, look, we're not bringing anything new, at least no major update. If they bring anything, I'd be very surprised indeed, because their car is already spectacular. But yeah, of course, their focus is on 2023. Mercedes have a couple of things coming here for the US Grand Prix. There's also some changes to other cars we'll discuss in a couple of seconds. And Mercedes have brought a fair bit this year to their car, but far less than they would have liked to, I'm sure, based on the cost cap they had to kind of stay under for this season, but also last season as well. So Toto Wolff has doubled down and said, yeah, look, this Red Bull budget cap overspend was not minor. Yes, it says minor in the regulations. Anything under 5% is minor. Anything over 5% is material. And then, look, if it's a material breach, then probably you get into this whole reduction of points territory in the championship. But in the minor realm, then the discussion is really that probably that's not going to happen. But Toto Wolff and Mercedes and Ferrari are going to be pushing for it because, they obviously didn't overspend. They hit the numbers they were meant to hit. And, the fact that another team didn't do that is obviously kind of frustrating, and I think understandably so. So Toto Wolff says, he argues that even spending an extra 500k can make a difference. We saw that Hamilton the other day said an extra 300k for a new front wing. That might make a big difference in the championship. And yeah, Toto Wolff, the rumour has it really that Red Bull have spent, 3-4 times that figure over the budget cap for last season. But one of the questions really is, what exactly did they spend that money on? Did they spend it on catering, or did they spend it on additional absenteeism, as was the initial discussion? The absenteeism point, some people have now pointed out that that's not even really included in the cost cap anyway, so that's probably not relevant. And surely they're not feeding their team and stuff that much better than other teams to spend an extra 1.8 mil. So that's the thing. Maybe they are over, it depends, right? If you're over the cost cap, you can break it down any number of ways. You can say it was the catering for that extra 2 mil, or you can say, well, the catering was in, and then there was another 2 mil that was found elsewhere, right? So it's difficult to say exactly what made them go over, but Mercedes are confident that it was further upgrade to their car. He says right here, we also monitor closely which parts are brought to the track by the top teams, 2 top teams, Ferrari and Mercedes, of course, and another spends more. So quite clear really in his assessment here that he's saying, well, look, straight up, we believe they brought more parts than we could afford to the track in the last season in 2021, and that's where they spent the extra money, right? It wasn't on this whole catering shenanigans that was going around. So what do you guys think about this? Because Hamilton kind of said the same thing. He was like, well, these guys every weekend last year in 2021 were turning up with a new bucket load of upgrades, and we kind of couldn't really understand how that was possible, and Toto Wolff has doubled down. So does this affect what the FIA do? The thing is, I believe, is that if the teams were to kind of complain, it's a bit of a weird process because the teams could have protested against a particular team's kind of overspending, but they could only do so up to May or something this year before they even know what the other teams have done. So there's no protesting that can go on. I think teams can appeal, if they're found to be over, they can appeal against that. But once the decision is made by the FIA, there is no appeals process. There is no kind of the teams can't say anything outside of what they say publicly. They can't kind of appeal officially to the FIA or to the committee to get anything changed. That's where things get kind of dodgy here. And that's why the teams have to say everything they can publicly, because that's their only chance to make any changes here, because they can't go to the FIA behind the scenes and give their perspective. It's not permitted within the regulations. So what do you guys think about this, right? Mercedes pretty much saying, yeah, it wasn't this whole catering shenanigans that was actually causing them to be over. It wasn't the fact that Gordon Ramsay was at the track making some pretty good food. There were other factors in play as to why the team ended up, spending more than their allocated budget for last season. What does this mean, right? Because all the top teams are trying to paint the picture, and understandably, that last year's Red Bull 16B was developed, more than it should have been based on the extra money that was pumping through. That's what Mercedes seem to, they haven't exactly said it fully out, right? But they've pretty much said it, right? That, there were more upgrades coming than they thought should have been possible, right? But drama all across the park, because there's even Christian Horner coming out as well. This guy, honestly, when he's won something and he's in that smug mode, he cannot be stopped with kind of the trash talk stuff that goes on between him and other teams. He even kind of said recently that Toto Wolff smashing those headphones last year, that's just not good leadership. you know, I wouldn't do something like that, all this type of stuff. So Horner's at it again, man. This guy absolutely cannot be stopped. I did say I'd mention quickly some more upgrades. This from Alfa Romeo, when apparently after, like, I don't know why they're introducing upgrades so late, because their car's been terrible for many rounds now. It was good at the start of the year because it was at the weight limit, we believe. Since then, other teams have come down. Alfa Romeo has regressed massively, and apparently they're now just starting to bring back more upgrades. But yeah, obviously it's a little bit too little too late, you would think, for where they currently find themselves in the championship. Lando Norris, of course, is pretty much in a one-man fight, unfortunately, this season with Alpine for P4 in the constructors. And even Alpine were clapping back and saying that, you know, Norris has been saying, wow, Alpine must be a terrible team if they're not so far ahead of us because we have such a better car. And now Alpine have clapped back and they've said, yeah, this Lando guy is just rattled by our performance and stuff like this. So drama everywhere in Formula 1, as is obviously per usual. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new. Take care, and I'll see you next time.